All right, we are recording. So, good afternoon, class. This is your professor, Dr. Jace, and as always, we are very delighted to have a special guest for this week's recording, and that special guest will be Steve Cramer, who is the business librarian at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro, which is one of my previous employers. And Steve has a lot of knowledge and a lot of know-how and is very well connected within the business library world. So I knew he would be a perfect person for us to do a question and answer with. So we are going to jump right in. Steve, I've got a few questions for you, and then at the end of my questions, I always open the floor for the interviewee to just express whatever else they wanted to express, but definitely wanted to get through the set of questions that I had for you first. So first of all, and thank you again for joining us, by
Sure.
the way.
Happy to be here.
Thank you. And the first question is, here we go. Um, can you tell us a bit about your career trajectory, including what you originally thought you'd be doing when you were in library school, and how you ended up in your current position with UNC Greensboro?
Sure, I can do that. Not necessarily the way I had planned it, but that's not too unusual for us, right? And also for business librarians too. So uh, I was an undergraduate at University of Michigan and chose to go to Chapel Hill for my library school degree and took the business information class just because I knew nothing about the subject. I was thinking reference librarian, humanities reference librarian. My undergraduate degree is in medieval studies, medieval history, art, literature, that kind, languages, that kind of stuff. But the business class would be, useful to expand my mind about, what reference librarians do. And so I took that class. And it was challenging. It was interesting. A lot of new stuff. And it was one thing different about it, I think, is that, at least from my perspective, that you had to learn concepts about the business world. And then stage two, learn about research strategies and sources. So it was like, what's it mean to be a publicly traded company? What kind of financials do they have to do? What's the nature of their corporate structure? And then you learn about how to find databases. Well, back then it wasn't so much databases. This is 94. We had some databases. SEC filing. Sorry, digression already, Dr. Chase. I will try not to do that too often. What manuals, what reference materials, there we go, and what strategies exist to support this kind of research. So it's first learn about the ideas, the concepts, the topics, the tools, and then learn about the strategies. So that was an interesting twist to that class that I didn't have as much of in other classes too. By chance, my first job outside library school was back home in Holland, Michigan, my hometown, across the lake from Chicago. And the local campus branch of a school called Davenport College of Business, which is now Davenport University, needed to hire a librarian. And I was lucky to get that job because I didn't have a whole lot of experience when I came out of library school. I could have done a better job of networking and looking for opportunities. So that could be a discussion topic at the end, Dr. Jace, about getting the most of your. I think most students are much more savvy than I was at that time, but still. And even though, however, it had business in its name, it wasn't a pure business college. It had a lot of general education classes. So we had history and language, a lot of tech support, computing classes. So it was a good job in that we only had 3 librarians total for this campus. And so I had to do cataloging, which I never thought I would do, even though I had 1 class in it. And yes, some business reference and even occasionally some workshop, teaching going on. So that was my first touch into business information as a librarian. And then around this 2 years later, I saw by chance a job posting at Duke, and they were hosting in the main library, Perkins Library, a position, reference department position for reference librarian with a business focus and what we back then called digital service skills. So like creating web pages, creating online guides, chat reference was on the horizon as well. So combined business research, but also just general like reference technology. This would be late 90s when a lot of technology was based in reference departments before it became so specialized that you had tech departments doing a lot of it too. And so I moved to Durham, love Durham, I miss Durham, even though my wife and I now live with Salem, I'm jumping ahead. And that was a good position. I was doing a lot of general reference for that research institution, but also focusing on business and working with the business school library, which is separate. It's like a half mile down the road. Still in touch with some of those folks. They haven't changed personnel much since then. And that was a good job. I met my wife at Duke. She was a library student. And when she changed jobs to get her first job at Wake Forest, which is Winston-Salem, where I live now, about an hour and a half away from Durham, over near the mountains, not in the mountains, but close to the mountains than Raleigh, Durham is, we started dating. And then we got married. And I moved from Durham to Winston-Salem and was lucky to get my job at UNCG right after the honeymoon. Where at UNCG, I was finally, after about 5 years of work, an official business librarian or business liaison librarian. And we'll talk, I'm sure Dr. Jace will have questions for me about what I do at UNCG, but that was my unexpected path from medieval studies major to taking a business class just on a whim because it looked interesting and new and I should challenge myself. And it did challenge myself or challenge me. And then gradually, after 3 positions, becoming a full-time business librarian. Does that make sense, Jason? Is that a good
Oh,
summary?
absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, that was a perfect summary. And one of the reasons I wanted to ask that question was specifically to convey to the students that a lot of people who end up as business librarians didn't necessarily plan to
Yes.
be there. And that's something that's very important for them to know. So I'm very glad that you gave the details. And, I don't want my students thinking they have to have an MBA to be a business librarian.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
totally not the case. So,
I totally agree with that.
yes.
Most of us learn it on the job. You've got librarians working at the biggest business schools in the country, earning getting awards from Brass and other things who don't have a business degree of any sort, undergraduate or MBA or anything else too. You can do it too, if you want to. Don't mean to scare off anyone too early.
Oh yeah, and I think that this is going to actually help not scare them off. I think it's going to help, them embrace, the possibility and the potential. So
Yeah.
very
And,
good.
and
Yes.
and this might be jumping ahead too, and I'll keep this quick, but business librarianship is actually a pretty broad term. You can do a lot with it. And it's not just helping privileged students learn how to become high financiers and work on Wall Street. We'll maybe get into that later on, but there's a lot more involved and a lot more possibilities for service, for accomplishments, for jobs that you may get besides, a very traditional helping a finance program, as I mentioned a minute ago.
Yes, and I do. That's something that, not to get too far off the subject, but me and you have known each other for years, so we can just talk. And that's
Yeah, please.
yeah, that was one of the things that I was kind of looking forward to before this opportunity came up. I was pretty much the acting business librarian
Hmm.
liaison at Coastal Carolina. And for one thing, I did use a lot of the things that you taught me back in the day and, tried to get up to speed because things have changed a lot even since then. But also just, I did find it rewarding. I had a whole school on campus that considered me the go-to. That was rewarding. I had
Hmm. Hmm.
students that, they would bypass the other librarians and come to me, which wasn't necessarily a good thing, but, they knew they could get the answers faster from me and everything. And I was learning faster because they were doing that. And so,
Hmm.
these kind of things, they just, they all come together and it also it helps build your professional network and it
Hmm.
helps
Hmm.
with, if you have that skill set, I think it also makes you more marketable and employable. I think that specifically with either business or with health librarianship skill
Hmm.
sets, you can take those a long way.
Yeah.
So yeah, that is my goal to make sure that the students don't get scared off from learning this skill set, but that they actually embrace the opportunity and realize that it can broaden their
Hmm.
opportunities. Yes.
Social entrepreneurship, nonprofit librarianship, that's big. Public and academic libraries, there's a lot going on. Social equity issues, we may touch upon that. I had a conference that I co-hosted Thursday on cannabis entrepreneurship, and the big theme, as planned, was social equality, social equity issues. That business librarians are also can be involved with, and it's rewarding, important work. It's sorry, maybe I should stop there, Dr. Jace, without digressing too much. But yeah, it's a big umbrella. Business librarianship is a big umbrella, and there's lots of different things you can do with it.
Absolutely. And we will, that'll help us go pretty much into our next question here is just getting them more familiar with what goes on the job. So the second question I had was, what activities are you most engaged with in your role as a business librarian at UNC Greensboro?
Okay, I would say 3 things. emphasizing that I'm a public services librarian, teaching, consulting, and let's throw in databases as a subset of collections work. So like academic librarians all over, there's a wide variety of teaching we do now. We teach one-shot instruction. We come in, do one workshop, then you leave, and that's it. Although there might be some follow-up with students or groups or teams. In the case of business classes, often you have teams of students after that. But there's also more engaged instruction. Embedded librarianship is big in business. Some of us teach for credit classes, and that's maybe a growing aspect of its librarianship too. But one big trend for any of those types of teaching at UNCG, many of our classes now emphasize through the business school that, or a project where they're working with community partners. It's experiential learning. They learn by doing something. They're applying what they're learning. The students are applying what they're learning to produce a product. And I don't necessarily mean a physical thing. I mean, a report, a recommendations, more likely, some data to support a local organization, which could be an entrepreneur, small business, big business, nonprofit, government office. So a lot of my teaching is tied, whether it's one shot or more embedded, is tied to the classes that are working with community partners in experiential learning projects. And that's very rewarding because you're supporting the community and businesses and entrepreneurs and nonprofits, as well as supporting the students. And that's been my big in for instruction, is when they have these research intensive projects. Consulting, just that for UNCG, that applies to emails, phone calls, face-to-face Zoom sessions, working with a student or student team, one-on-one, reference question really, but it's a reference question you get because you are, as Dr. J said earlier, a known person, and you go to that person for business help of some sort, entrepreneurship, economic, et cetera, type help. So I do a lot of consultations, and that's anywhere from first year students to PhD students and faculty, and sometimes people from the community as well. And the final thing I mentioned was databases. And certainly, ebooks, print books, magazines, e-journals, data sets all are important still, some more than others, to business librarianship and business users. But databases that provide industry and market data and reports and company records, private, public, benchmarking of financials, there's a lot of different examples. That's a big need to have, hopefully, to have some money to buy those for your student body and your faculty too, grad students. So I spend a lot of time evaluating, comparing, negotiating databases, and trying to make sure that students have what they want. So that's a third thing I would say, besides teaching and consulting.
All right, excellent. And actually, my students won't know who Tim is, but I actually thought that Tim did all the negotiating for the database stuff. So glad you threw that in there. That was something that I hadn't taken into account, and I didn't really do that, in my role with Coastal Carolina. So it's good to also get that perspective, so that the students know that some of these things will vary, from school to school, and that's okay.
That's true. Yeah. You mentioned Tim Bucknell, who's also the founder of the Carolina Consortium, which is our consortium of 136 or so libraries in the two states, South and North Carolina. But if a database was along this businessy, Tim says, I don't know what this is. Steve, you tell me if this is worth pursuing or not. Or if you want to take it on, go ahead. And, I'll give you help or advice as needed. And I say, okay. So business stuff being specialized. And one difference is also a lot of it comes out of industry. And this is a challenge. This is not necessarily a positive thing. Sometimes it is, but usually it's not. These are commercial products from commercial companies that exist to sell research. And their primary market, here's a big difference, is that the primary market is industry. And by industry, we mean businesses, or trade associations, consultants, not academic markets and public library markets. Whereas, ProQuest, EBSCO, I bet many of you students know these names, Nexus Uni, Westlaw, they're not Westlaw, but the others are primarily sold to campuses and public libraries. So that's their main market. But for S&P, I once asked our Standard & Poor's S&P rep, what percentage of your clients are academic libraries? He said like 5%. 95% would be corporate, people, big companies too. So it's different negotiating with these companies that primarily sell to big research needs. They sell to Fortune 500 companies, not to academic libraries. And that's why negotiations are different sometimes. And so even Tim Bucknell doesn't always know what to do with a crazy data set of company data in terms of whether it's useful, and then two, what are negotiation strategies for that thing? Even though there are general principles, of course, you can apply for that. So that's another reason business is different. And I'm glad you're on this class because you're going to learn this from Dr. Jace that, you can't always treat all sources as the same way regarding like how to use them, how to do outreach, and definitely how to negotiate for them. If that's in your job mix. And for a lot of people, it's not. So don't worry about it necessarily at start.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you. And that piggybacking off the first question here, and when I ask this question, I'm thinking about things like professional organizations that you're involved in and things of that nature. But what are some activities you're involved with due to your position that you don't perform day to day or quite as frequently, but they are noteworthy when discussing your duties and responsibilities? So again, any involvement that you have in brass,
Yeah.
if you were involved with a business librarian network within the triad, any of those types of things. Mhm.
Let me give you two answers to that, Dr. J, so that's okay. We talked about business schools a lot already, and that's to be expected, I guess. But in addition to things I don't do daily, but are part of my job, and then I'll answer the professional organizations part second. I'm also the librarian for arts administration, for example. This is a degree program in our performing arts college. So music, dance, creative artist type students who know that they cannot necessarily get a full-time job dancing or playing their instruments or singing, even though they would like to. It's just a crowded market out there. So arts administration is a management degree to run arts organizations, and they do business research and entrepreneurship research. So I help them out. Likewise with our MPA program, so grad students who do, sorry, my phone went off, I'm going to silence it. Apologize for that. Masters of Public Affairs, so students in political science who want to run government agencies, work in mayors and county government offices, or NGO types, nonprofits to help fund economic development or help fund job creation, et cetera. So, and then third, we have a geography program, and geography in this case includes both urban geography, studying cities. How can cities be vital, good places to live, affordable places to live, and also or economic geography. How does economics vary by place? So I work with those students who are way outside the business school, but not daily basis, but that's in the mix too. So getting back to our first question about can business librarians do more than just support business students who go into finance? Yes, and those are examples of that too. Regarding, the second part of your question, yeah, there's a lot out there. And I encourage any student who really has interest in this to pursue one of these connections. So there's BRASS. I'm on the BRASS committee. It's useful working in a mentoring program. BRASS is Business Reference and Adult Services section. Does that sound right, Dr. Jace? Yeah, we just call it BRASS.
I think so. Yeah.
which is under RUSA, which is one of the sections of ALA. So to keep it simple, BRASS is the business librarianship part of ALA. There you go. Very friendly folks. When I first got involved in ALA, there were sections of it, parts of ALA that were not considered to be very friendly to new members, to young early career librarians. Some of them were kind of uppity. That's reputation, whether it's deserved or not. But BRASS has always been welcoming. You show up at a BRASS event when we can have physical things again, or you show up in a Zoom session. People will say, "Hey, who are you? Welcome. Glad you're here. Tell us about yourself." It's just a very friendly bunch. But in addition, and there's also SLA, and that's another international group. And if you care about a more, in some ways, diverse mixture of work environments, SLA, Special Library Association, has that as well. But also, there is a growing trend for regional and state level groups. And for example, we have Blink in North Carolina, Business Librarianship North Carolina. We started this in 2003 as a new thing, and it joined the State Library Association, NCLA, which Dr. Jace has connections with a few years later, after some debate whether we wanted to be stay independent or join NCLA. And we decided for good reason to join NCLA, and it's worked out well. But it is a vibrant group of public and academic librarians, social librarians too, and that's important. It's a diverse mix of persons who meet every 3 months in the old days, at least, and we'll hopefully do that again once we get out of the pandemic environment, in different cities. And we do peer mentoring, peer training, learn about new topics, socialize, have lunch, sometimes have adult beverages after our workshops in local breweries, etc. And there are other examples of this around. There's a new one that's in Boston. There's one being formed in Kentucky. There's other ones around the country. So if you care about this, look for regional or state level groups, because brass has been one of those things. Sorry, Blink has been one of those regional groups that I really haven't been involved, but not day to day, but on occasion, periodically, been something I've been involved in too. And now, while we're on the topic, let me throw out one more thing. There's also a group called simply New Business Librarians Group. It's not an official brass outfit, which means you don't have to pay any money to join it. My friend Angel Truesdale from Charlotte, UNC Charlotte, my counterpart at UNC Charlotte, is one of the current co-chairs of the New Business Librarians Group. And they have online meetings, I think monthly, and they have some training and some guest speakers, but it's largely a peer support, peer networking group. Very low stakes, low stress, hopefully very open, welcoming group. So yes, all these groups, not that one, that started off when I was already too old to be in it. But otherwise, each of these groups are things I'm involved in, not daily, but regularly throughout the week or throughout the month. And so I think that helps answer the question you asked, Dr. Jace.
It absolutely does. And also, and Angel is just amazing. And I mean, she's risen to a really prominent status very, very quickly. So,
Yes, yes.
yes.
She's also vice chair of Blink because I recruited her because I know she's great. Sorry, that was too obnoxious.
Oh, no,
Because I knew she was great, I asked her to serve as vice chair. She said, thankfully, said yes. So that's a different way of putting it.
Yeah, and I do want my students also to understand that a lot of times opportunities in this field come from, being recruited or the connections you make. So it's important for them to know that as well. So
you brought up networking, and regardless of what kind of librarianship or archivist work you do, you got to network. That's not a dirty word. It's a wonderful word. It means you make friends. You find support persons. You might become a mentor yourself someday. That's networking. It's a wonderful thing to pursue. I was not really good at networking until a while ago, but hopefully you all will do better than I did as a young early career librarian and embrace networking. There's also peer networking. It's not just meeting the old timers. There's more than that. So do pursue mentoring. Sorry, yes, mentoring. I'm changing subjects. Do pursue networking because it's a really useful thing to do.
And by the way, so you heard what Steve said, because I talk about networking all the time on the
Good,
student
thank you.
listserv, and I don't know how seriously I'm taken. So you've heard it from somebody else now. Networking means a lot in this profession. And if you are a shy person, then I would recommend just getting out of your shell a little bit because, unfortunately, the truth of the matter a lot of times is it's not about what you know, it's about who you know, just like the American story in general. So,
Yeah.
make sure that you're known, at least at the state association level. Just make sure that you're known, students. But I will always talk about networking, and even it should start now, networking with your fellow
Mm-hmm.
students in this program. So,
Mm-hmm.
yes.
I agree.
I will get to this next question here, which is, what things do you find most rewarding about your job as a business librarian?
Okay. My first answer is simply students. Students tend to be very appreciative when you reach out to them and when you provide them with more than just a cursory answer or cursory support. They generally, sometimes sometimes some librarians have valid issues with getting out there into their schools or departments they're associated with on their campuses. But at least at UNCG, students generally appreciate support they get. And maybe, I don't know, UNCG is a social mobility campus. We have like 1/3 of our students are first gens. I was a first gen in college too, so it was a while ago, but I can remember that time and what I felt like just not knowing what I was doing and not having the support network that other people had or just knew what to do. Anyway, maybe that's partly why they generally are very appreciative of any support, and so that makes me feel good. So that's a rewarding thing about it. And faculty too, same way, and they have different needs. They have different time pressures and other different pressures, of course, being a very different kind of person. But faculty also can be very thankful for the work you do. So more generally, helping teach students how to make good decisions with data. when we talk about business information literacy, it's not so much the ACR frameworks. Typically, I don't know if students, if you're aware of that construct or not, and nothing wrong with it. I mean, it has many wonderful things, but it doesn't really apply that well. Just seems to be a consensus for some of the professional librarian roles, such as, but by that I mean professional school, professional programs, such as business and health sciences, for example. We usually say helping students make good decisions with data is business information literacy. When I do that well, that's also very rewarding. When I see that they are presenting a recommendation to a nonprofit or to a small business or an entrepreneur, and they're citing some data that help them find, that they have mapping markets or mapping community needs because they're using Symphony Analytics or Policy Map or census mapping, and I help them learn how to do that. That's always very rewarding when I see them actually applying the data to make good decisions, make recommendations. So that's another thing I really enjoy. Yeah.
Excellent, excellent. And piggybacking off of that, what would you describe as one of your biggest success stories that you've had in your role? Now, I said at UNCG, but Duke as well, or wherever you've
Yeah.
served as a business librarian, just one of the biggest success stories that you can think of offhand.
Okay. Well, okay, here's a short, hopefully short story, and Dr. Jace will give me a sign if I'm going on too long or something. We hired a hotshot head of our entrepreneurship program, like 10 years ago now, Dr. Dan Welsh. And I knew she was, a really big hire for us, and knew that she was teaching one of the classes that I often was involved with the one-shot instruction, but I really wanted to get more embedded into that class and with her. And so I practically tried to worm my way into the class. And then actually, eventually she did. It didn't actually take that long, a year, maybe one semester or two. She started introducing me as co-teacher of the class. And that was rewarding in itself. But what it led to by giving my time, providing my time and expertise with her students, and this was a required junior level entrepreneurship class where the students do a business plan basically, is that she recruited me later on to become one of her Coleman Fellows. Coleman Foundations in Chicago, they fund entrepreneurship education, but their main point is funding entrepreneurship as a topic of non-business school students. They want professors in the arts and sciences, social sciences, health sciences to include entrepreneurship in their curriculum because those students also need to create their own jobs, start jobs, create nonprofits. It's not just the business school majors who need to do that. And so since I'm not a business school faculty member, I'm in the library, I've qualified as a non-business school person. So I became a Coleman Fellow for education, which meant I started teaching a 3-credit class. I created my own class on entrepreneurship research. Upper levels, so it's juniors, seniors, grad students, what I'm doing now, like 8 years in a row now, which I really enjoy. Also going to Chicago every August for the Coleman Fellow Summits, they do once a year. And then maybe final thing about this, I got additional travel money that I was able to use to go to not library conferences, I do that too, that's great, but to entrepreneurship education conferences. So entrepreneurship professors who teach, classes typically or run curriculum. Names include USASB and SBI and GCEC, for example. I was able to go to these conferences, learn from them, but also be an advocate for libraries. I was doing programming. I was submitting proposals, getting accepted, and doing my 30-minute or hour-long workshop or presentation with a business professor audience, typically entrepreneurship professor audience, but also advocating for all those people there from all over North America to use their business librarians and their business library resources, their databases, the other sources there. And that was very rewarding to be able to be an advocate for a national audience of business librarianship to faculty, some of whom were already very connected to the librarians, but some of them had no idea they had a librarian at their own home campus who focused on entrepreneurship. So that was a neat outcome of working with Ann Welsh, Professor Welsh, and getting involved with her classes and her research, and then becoming one of her Coleman Fellows. So that's been a success story that has paid dividends, business analogy, sorry, all along, and continues to do so.
All right, excellent. And yeah, it is one of the pieces that I pulled out of that I was glad that you I also want the students to kind of realize that libraries do need advocates, and that includes even on campuses where the library is, seen as central to the operations of the campus and everything. You still sometimes have to, unfortunately, but I'm going to tell it the way I see it, and if Steve disagrees, he can say so. But I think that sometimes you do just have to prove to some faculty members that the librarians aren't
Yeah.
idiots and they actually can help with the curriculum and with student success and everything. And so it sounds like this gave you an opportunity to do that. And that's something that I'm going to keep it real, students. If you go to an academic library, there are going to be some faculty members who are teaching faculty who will kind of, I don't want to use the word look down, but they will still
No, they
kind of,
will.
okay, yeah, they'll see
Go
you
ahead.
as pseudo faculty kind of. And so, but when you have somebody like Steve, that's the type of figure that can, get that respect from those faculty members and have these faculty members take the library seriously and then incorporate the library into their curriculum, which is always helpful for not just for us. It ends up being very helpful for the students. And if the professor is savvy enough, it can be very helpful for the professors. So, yes, thank you
I
for
think that's
bringing that.
totally true. Yeah. And I don't want to sound like I'm sugarcoating things. I'm also trying to make things sound positive and optimistic because I am. From just how quickly I talk about some of these things, that I passionately find this kind of work very rewarding. And I'm so glad to have that, to know that Dr. Jace's students, that you all are pursuing business librarianship, or at least you are in this class. But even that, yeah, despite that fact, that I find this very enjoyable. Yeah, there are still issues out there, and I don't mean to sugarcoat the fact that sometimes you do have to prove yourself, and that's totally true. That's when the networking helps, right? Because you can talk to a colleague. You went through this last year, right? Or you went through this 10 years ago when you were new. How did you handle this? And you talk and share. So that really helps out with dealing with having to come back and provide a better sales pitch on your end about how you and your library and your resources can support the professor or the students or whatever else is going on. So yeah, I think that's totally valid.
Awesome, awesome. And going into, and it doesn't have to be negative per se, but I do like to keep it real with my students. So
Good. Yeah.
what would you find to be some of the biggest challenges in business librarianship at an academic library?
Okay. Um, let's say two things. On most campuses, the business school is one of the largest units on campus. There's usually a liberal arts college, which has 20, 30, 40 departments, and it's usually very large. But in terms of like specialized programming, the business schools are big. In a library like mine, I am the only business librarian. I'm in the general library. So I'm in a general library like I was at Duke, although they have a separate business school library as well. So I'm on my own, and I have 4,000 plus students. Most cases, that's a big number. Um, I'll name names because they've said I could. My friend Elizabeth Price at James Madison has 5,000 plus. My friend Min Tong at University of Central Florida has 9,000 plus students. She has to handle 9,000 students. That's a problem. I think that's a management issue. I think there's a lack of student centeredness. Although, yeah, that's a fast growing campus there in Orlando, and maybe they just grew faster than they could hire librarians with their budgeting labor issues they've got. Maybe, I don't know. Anyway, there's a word for a phrase for this: lean liaisoning. When you have many more thousands of students than anyone could really handle, in terms of providing the same level of service to everybody, it's lean liaisons. You have to prioritize. You have to make decisions. You have to say no sometimes, and I have to do that too. So it's hard when you have that. On the other hand, there are typically more at flagship campuses and like the elite private schools. You do get a separate business school library where you might have a handful of librarians serving their business school, some of which are smaller than the UNCG business school, and that makes it easier. I think I've not worked in that environment before, but I think it's safe to say if you've got two or three business librarian colleagues, it's easier to do. But a lot of schools, you're in a general library like I am. I'm in the main library. There's just the main library and the music library at UNCG for serving 20,000 students total. I had to do it all. And I shouldn't say that because my colleagues who staff our reference services, the reference chat, they're really good with business students. They help as much as they can. Sometimes I pull in our government information librarian. There's connections there between the work those people do and what we do. our data people as well. So there can be some support, but sometimes you do get a lot of students. On the other hand, here's a plus. Uh, that means you're busy, you're in demand, and your stats are high. Every year when you do your annual report, how many consultations did I do? Every year, okay, if I can be direct, Dr. Jace, every year since 2001, I've had the most consultations at UNCG. Often I do more than many of my colleagues put together. And that's probably because I have a lot of students, right? So yeah, you would expect that, but also it's outreach and it's having resources to provide and skills to provide. So you do get busy. If you like being a busy in-demand librarian, business librarianship may be what you want to focus on because that often is the case. Number two, and I'll keep this short, I promise, and it's pretty routine. Budgets, we talked about biz databases can be weird and that they're primarily sold to companies. The academic market and public library market is secondary and often very small. So they're expensive products and there's licensing issues, which probably don't want to get into today. It's in detail. But some of these products aren't really designed for campus-wide usage. Some of them are intended for one person at a time to use them, or like a Bloomberg's terminal only in one computer. Physically it's one computer. It's not even online. It's a web resource, but you have to physically use one machine, for example. That's how Bloomberg works, for example. Some of them only PhD students and faculty can use it. No undergraduates, no MBA students. Anyway, licensing issues. There's much more of them for business content than there is for humanities or social science content too. So budgets and licensing, often headaches and challenges that we have to deal with